Each year, Microsoft Research hosts hundreds of influential speakers from around the world, including leading scientists, renowned experts in technology, book authors, and leading academics, and makes videos of these lectures freely available.
Well over a decade ago, I was sitting in my office when I was doing some TA, and a student of mine came to me and said, "Hey, Tolga, do you know a professor from Oregon State is coming over? You got to go talk to him." I said, "Why?" "Well, don't you want to go on to continue in the grad school?" "Huh, yeah, let's see." So there was Dr. Koch sitting in my office back in 93 or something like that. Been a while, 93 or 94. And then we talked about it, and I find myself in the Oregon State and working with Dr. Koch. And then I think it's been about 11 years or 10 years, roughly, since the last exam that he and I were in the same room. And then since then, we of course kept in touch every now and then on various technical issues and others, of course. And here the first time at Microsoft, and I'm going to sit there right next to Josh and listen to Dr. Koch again after so many years. Anyways, that's a personal touch. On the more technical side, at the time we worked on a lot of high performance number theoretical crypto systems, multiplications, exponentiations, all sorts of things. And then after that, after I actually left the grad school, Dr. Koch went into more on the hardware type of things, but he did some work before that actually. And now here we are looking at some branch prediction type of side channel attacks, which I have nothing to do with actually so far. And he's done that work back at Oregon State. Previously, he and I also worked with Intel, also for somewhat with Microsoft, with some support from Microsoft. Did a lot of research on mostly about, again, the high performance cryptography systems. And here's Dr. Koch, and he's going to tell us about the hardware and branch prediction attacks. And thank you.
Well, I got my PhD from UC Santa Barbara in 1988. I had a chance to work with Alan Konheim. I don't know how many of you know him. And but he didn't want to work with me because he said he works for NSA at the same time, and he doesn't want to take non-American students. And it was, but I was always interested in cryptography, and even if Alan didn't work with me, at least I took his course and followed up his work. And just after graduate school, I got more into that. And my first job was at the University of Houston in Texas. I was an assistant professor for 4 years. Then, like everybody else who once comes to West Coast, never wants to leave West Coast, I wanted to come back to West Coast. And the only job that was available for me was Oregon State University. So I went there, and I stayed there until now. And just recently, I am about to leave Oregon State, and I will probably go back to UCSB to teach maybe 1 or 2 terms. And then I will see what I want to do next. And this work, which is side channel attacks, as you know, is a very prolific area of research in Europe. And a lot of PhDs are given out on side channel attacks and countermeasures at European universities, particularly 2 at Belgium and several in France, and at least 1 or 2 in Germany. And some other universities as well near, but mostly in Northern Europe. And also the biggest smart card companies are in that area. There was GemPlus, now turned into Gemalto, so some funding to be available. But this work is much less interesting to American researchers, to researchers at US universities. And because side channels, the way they work, is works for small devices that don't have any power, where the adversary can take a hold of the device briefly. Maybe when you're putting your credit card over a card reading machine on a cashier, and a Fred Meyer, let's say, and they can briefly watch your card and gather some information, which they can go ahead and then later analyze to gather information about the bits. But it's really not that practical to apply to a processor like Pentium, because it looks very complicated. And how can you have a side channel there? Because there are so many things involved, and particularly, how can you really measure power in Pentium while it's running? And you will probably burn your fingers trying to do that. But it turns out that there's actually ways to do that too. And the first paper that was really, to me, important was a paper by Daniel Page, a researcher from Bristol, who had a paper which was never published, was rejected by some conference. And so it was only a technical report about cache attacks. So I was very curious. Usually good papers are rejected. If you're in a new area, when you write your first paper, it's bound to be rejected. Later on, people discover, oh, this is important, and the papers get accepted. But the seminal paper, the most important paper, never gets published probably, and it's true in many areas. So I took that problem in 2002, and I said, sorry about this. Yeah. I took that problem in 2002, and I said, can I first of all understand that? And then if I understand that, can I emulate it? Can I redo the attack? And then if I do that, what's the next thing to do with it? So this work that started in 2002 with several graduate students and myself went into what I will describe today, and then probably will go into further maturation and importance. Okay, in the classical model of cryptography, you have a very idealized environment. You have ideal devices in which you're doing encryptions, and then there's a channel where the ciphertext flows, and an ideal device in which you're doing decryption. There's this basic assumptions of cryptography. You say the adversary knows the algorithm, adversary has access to the channel, therefore knows the ciphertext, and then you further this scenario by saying that, well, maybe he knows several plain texts and the corresponding ciphertext, or he knows, the adversary knows several, he can choose the plain text, or he can choose the ciphertext, etc. In this model of cryptography, you try to, it's essentially a mathematical analysis. What you try to do is you look at the scenarios under which you know several plain text, several ciphertext, algorithm, and then you try to see if there are shortcuts to find the key, or shortcuts to create a decryption machine. But in another model of cryptography, which is side channel model of cryptography, then not only the adversary has access to the ciphertext and algorithm, but he has access to some other information, because cryptographic algorithms must run on actual physical devices which have physical properties, and therefore they emanate information regarding what they do. For example, so that way the adversary sits there, not only on the channel but also near the machine, and then in that machine it sort of gathers information, maybe timing information, power information, electromagnetic information from the process of encryption or decryption that is done by the physical device. This there's other things also. For example, you can say maybe fault is also in this category, but I think not. Reason being because fault is an interventionist type of thing. Those are very passive listeners who listens, just timings, and who listens to power and electromagnetic. And the other thing I want to bring your attention to is the reason I put it in that order is actually very special. Timing is the way I see it, is a one-dimensional data. For every encryption, for every ciphertext or plain text, you have one time. How much it took to do that, how much it took to decrypt that, how much it took to sign that data. And the power is not that way. Power is two-dimensional. Not only how much at a time, but you have a graph, a two-dimensional graph. As time progresses, how much power has been drawn. And therefore, you have the spikes where the multiplications and squarings are done, and no spikes where there are no multiplications or no squaring. So it's a two-dimensional data. But electromagnetic is three-dimensional, because Electromagnetics tells you from which part of the chip. When you have a very sensitive, good antennas, you get near to the device with those antennas. For example, if it's an FPGA device, you have these near-field antennas that come close to it. And not only you have time-varying information, which is two-dimensional, but you know which part of the chip it's coming from. So it's a three-dimensional data. So the more dimensions to the side channels, the more powerful the adversary becomes. And that's really an important thing to consider. And the least dimensional one is the time, the timing information. Because there you have just a bunch of data and then corresponding timings of the data. And now you're trying to get information by looking at that. And so if you can put some structure into it, another dimension into it, it will make it richer and it will make it much more powerful. And this view is important is because it turns out that in one of the branch predictions, you can make the timing data more dimensional, put another dimension into it, and therefore you can make it much more powerful. In the least powerful version, you need a lot more data to analyze. In the most powerful version, one encryption suffices because there is information about that, and there is more inside information about that. So the side-channel cryptography, or cryptanalysis, is a new area of applied cryptography. We're trying to break it, and essentially that's what I said. It's mostly for attacking smart cards, because smart cards don't have power, and also they can be watched while they're computing because they have been inserted to some card reader, and the card reader is vogue, it's a sort of adversary's card reader, and you just briefly, you press it in, and the cashier machine dumps you the hash, and you're supposed to sign that, and while you're signing it, it watches the process of the signature computation. Until Bonnet and Bromley paper, and this was thought of to be an area of only smart cards. But that has changed because of that. In 2003 paper, there is a remote attack on RSA, OpenSSL implementation on a server, that shows that, in fact, this kind of attacks are, the same kind of methodology is possible, one remote server attacking another remote server. And the attack reveals a 1024-bit RSA key over a server, over a LAN. And we looked at this. This was like one of the first work that we did. By the way, the first student and the first person is Ajich, but it's impossible to pronounce name, much more than mine. And Schindler is a German researcher whom is a mathematician, actually, is that we were collaborating. Ajich was my PhD student and myself. So we reduced the number of queries needed by the remote server to find the key from like 1.4 million to only 100K. 100K is still not feasible, yet it's much more feasible than 1.4 million, and that's the idea. And the way this works, as you know, Bonnet and Bromley, that with some other knowledge that you're choosing the ciphertext, having them decrypted, and I'm watching the time and keep sending new, and then faithfully the server obeys to that, so answers to you each time, which is probably also unrealistic. So this side-channel attacks is moving into a PC now, commodity PC, and that's interesting because PC is supposed to create an environment of trusted computing, isolated execution of applications. And these attacks are also different from embedded platforms only if you could have an unprivileged process. It's interesting because a privileged process don't have to worry about side channel. They can just go ahead and read things from the process, from the memory, from the cache. Only if you have an unprivileged software-based attacks, then it would be much more interesting. And there's an issue here that another difference is that in the previous applications, different data paths, data-independent execution paths, cause different timings. But in the microarchitectural attacks, even if the same execution path, because the way the microarchitecture is going to cause a different kinds of execution path. Because out-of-order executions, the way the cache is being used, previous, at the same time, other processes using the cache or the branch target buffer and other places changes the way algorithm works. And therefore, this is a slightly different kind of attack. And so as I'm telling you, I'm also trying to still understand what are the real implications of this. Because smart cards are embedded processors. They're very simple processors. They're signal processing, DSP type of processors. They just follow exactly the same order every time you execute. But that's not true for Pentium, let's say. Okay. So these attacks, we name them microarchitectural analysis or microarchitectural cryptanalysis. These side channel attacks are special class. They exploit the microarchitectural properties, components of a processor. And essentially, we can only think about time, and because we don't know how to deal with power yet, but perhaps maybe in the future power will be important. So far, cache analysis has been invented. There's cache attacks, and then since last year now we have branch prediction analysis, but at the same time, instruction cache is also seems to be possible, and finally, there's the shared functional units like big multipliers that are being shared that will cause timing variations. And the idea here is, yeah. No, nothing is ridiculous. No, I don't think anybody has looked at it. Yeah.
Someone looked at the right buffers?
Yeah. In fact, I should tell you this. When we looked at cache attacks, we said, what's next? Okay, other components, but what components? My first instinct was that look into processor to anything that looks like cache. That's why we looked at branch prediction. Even though now we have attacks on branch prediction that has based on the branch prediction algorithm. In fact, our first attack was on branch target buffer, which is a cache, kind of cache. So all of these attacks really are variations on the same theme, which is trying to manipulate a buffer that is being shared by many processes at the same time. And then you can do. And so you have two processes running on the same processor in parallel. So one we call it, spy process. The other one we call it cipher process or crypto process. Cipher process is just doing its job as it's required, and the other process is watching and forcing the branch target buffer to do other things that is causing the first process to create timing variations on its operations. Yeah. And again, say again. The very first attack is cache. Yeah. Why? Because somebody invented it. Because somebody found a way. I don't know why cache. Why? Maybe, like the way these things go, I guess, maybe when we discover all the implications of side-chain analysis for processor components, then we'll have a theory of it. But before the theory comes out, we're working what we got, which is the first one that was invented, cache. Because cache was more visible, I guess. Cache is easily recognizable, and branch prediction is not very well known to undergraduate students. You don't get to study that kind of stuff. In graduate school, even though there is something called branch prediction and all that, very little known because those algorithms and their details are not published well. Maybe for intellectual property reasons by a company like Intel or AMD, maybe for other reasons. But you can't really find details of the branch target buffer and the way it's organized as opposed to cache, which is much better known, and that makes it easier to analyze because you could make assumptions, but something that you know little, you don't know what kind of assumptions to make. So we still have the same problem about branch prediction. And this doesn't have to be, applications running in parallel. It could be, quasi-parallel by OS scheduling, or explicitly parallel, depending the degree of additional hardware, like dual processors, dual cores, and SMT. And the whole point is that several processes are sharing same resource, whose sharing causes timing variations. That's the whole, summary. Okay. And so therefore the spy process can perhaps gather information about it. Okay. I have at the end of this paper, which I think I sent you a copy of. There's a long list of, I put all the references. I'm going to give this talk at UCSB in this week. So I wanted to be helpful to the graduate students. I found a list of all of these papers regarding macro architectural attack, which, by the way, is a term that we sort of pushed, because it's different from the other side channel attack. So let's talk about cache attacks, because if you understand at least one form of cache attacks, then we understand the branch prediction attack well. Okay. So we know what cache is: small and fast storage area. It has the most frequently used data. Then we have the issues cache hit or cache miss, whether hit or miss or hit, whether that is in the cache, then you read it, and then whether it's not, then it has to be refreshed from the memory. And we have the concept of cache block or cache line, more commonly used. And this is the one block of data, the size of the block, and that is read from the memory to the cache. And each time there is a cache miss, and then this amount of data is being read from the main memory to the cache. So the cache attacks exploit the cache behavior, the statistics of hits and misses. And what are the information leakage? Execution time would be different, and perhaps power consumption would be different. Yeah? I am unable to measure power consumption, but I can make a theory about, hypothesis about execution time. And what happens is that cryptographic algorithms have different memory access patterns. Once I know about these access patterns, then I can actually recover the secret key. Okay, here's a picture that explains this, and picture is highly oversimplified, because for every data, there's logical address, physical address, and so these matchings are not really always correct, but logically, lower bits of the data is going to determine where it's going to put into the cache. And if there is a spy process, okay, and there's part of the cache is being accessed, okay, and the spy process reads the cache again. If it finds it there, if its own data is already still in the cache, then it hasn't been evicted from the cache by another process, and that's the thing. So therefore, a spy process can measure its own timing and tell whether the other process was writing to that part of the cache. And attacking like AES means essentially, you have a lookup table for the inversion part of the, table lookup part of the AES, and that takes a large amount of space in the cache. So, and which part of it is being read gives you information. And by spy process at writing it to a particular part and reading it from it, it tells you, based on its own timing, whether that part of the cache is being accessed and which part of the table lookup it's reading from. And this is essentially, and therefore it's reading an internal state of the AES algorithm, and therefore getting information about the key. So this is called access-driven attack because it has to do with access. Whether the other processor, you occupy it, you come back, and then you want to read it, and it's not there. That means the other process has occupied it after you left. And therefore, that part of the cache, that part of the table lookup has been accessed. So it's an access-driven attack. And the only thing you have to measure is your own timing. The spy process just measures its own timing. If there's another process doing this. So we are doing statistical attacks. There are many things that are happening at the same time. So what we're doing a lot of measurements, and then we're putting these measurements out, and then doing a lot of analysis, getting rid of all those noise from the data, finally making a decision. So anything that makes that kind of effect, it makes our job harder. And we need more samples then to tune in, to make it finer. Okay. These pictures are not very good because it's supposed to be, this was written in, actually, I don't know why this shows up this way. I have a Mac with PowerPoint 2003 on it. And then, yeah, and I'm giving a talk at Microsoft. So don't tell this to anybody. Now you already know that. And, but inside it, I have virtual machine, which has Windows XP in it. So, I'm not that illiterate about computers, let me put it that way. And so, but in that, I have a PowerPoint 2007. And I have all kinds of compatibility problems because of this. One figure doesn't work in the other, etc. Sorry for this, yeah. So, this picture, basics of the cache attacks, which actually I showed it briefly, but this is exactly, well, I explained it to you briefly, and it's based on whether for spy process taking more time or less time to read the data it has already read or it has already written before. Yeah.
You can see that it all works on a direct map cache.
Yes.
And
what if associative?
Work on two-way and four-way.
Yeah.
Anybody made it work on the fully associative cache of ours?
If it's fully associative, I'm not sure, but it's some directness, some direct mapping is required for this mapping. But fully associative is a completely different story. Okay. So what about branch prediction? So this is a new one, right? The idea is that time penalty paid for a mispredicted branch is the issue here. Okay. And what's susceptible here? Well, AES doesn't have any branches in it. It's a straightforward code, and no branches, no conditional branches. But RSA and ECC does. Montgomery algorithm does. The subtraction step says if in it, and if A times B is bigger than N, subtract N again from it. So those kind of ciphers will be susceptible. So these big processors speculatively execute instructions, right? That's the idea. And the branch prediction units, based on the history, tries to predict whether the current branch is to be taken or not. And if it says to be taken and it's taken, less penalty paid, or zero penalty paid, and then therefore you get more speed. But if you mispredict it, then you pay the penalty. And branch prediction algorithms work in different ways. And they have, but however, there is an algorithm. And the algorithm says, let's say, if the last two branches are taken, the third one will be taken, let's say. So the algorithm is based on history of the same branch. If I come back here, that part of the loop again, whether I will take or not depends on whether I have taken and how many times I have taken that same branch or not. So, of course, we don't know the branch will be taken or not because it's a conditional branch based on the data that will be computed. So we don't have full information about this. And so during that time, the processor goes ahead and as if it decides to be taken, goes ahead and fills the pipeline as if it will be taken. And if it's taken, great. Then it will continue based on this. I found a picture of what is the single misprediction branch outcome. It's 150 cycles. It's big number of cycles that are paid in penalty. It's nearly 150. Yeah. I believe so. That's true. Not just the pipeline itself, but the recovery work as well. Yeah. Which of the processors? I think it's Pentium 4. Yeah.
The newer ones are slightly better.
Yeah.
So maybe Pentium 3.
Yeah. This is, do you think it's Pentium 3 is 150? You said Pentium 3 would be 150 nearly, or Pentium 4 would be better? Yeah.
The Core 2s are better than the Pentium 4.
I see. Yeah. Okay. Few words about the branch predictor. That's the algorithm that makes a decision taken or not taken, to be taken or not to be taken. Okay. It's a very important part of the current processors. Okay. Idea is, as I said, allow processors to fetch and execute instructions without waiting for a branch to be resolved. Okay. Almost all pipeline processors do branch prediction of some form because they must guess the address of the next instruction. Okay. There are two issues. One is to decide whether branch is to be taken or not. The second is, if it's to be taken, what's the address? That's called branch target prediction, or computing the target address. Well, that's the important part of it. So there are these two logical parts. Okay. We have what's called the target buffer and the predictor algorithm. Target buffer is like a cache, okay, where the CPU stores target addresses of previously executed branches. Okay. It's limited in size, and only a few addresses can be put in it. And if you were supposed to put a new address in it, you have to evict a previous one from it. And so you have those two work together. Yeah, prediction, and after the prediction, finding the target address. So, how does this attack really work? Okay. Well, there are variations of this attack, but essentially this is what we do. Okay. Let's say we make 100,000, 10,000, not more than 10,000. Let's say 10,000 measurements of different M's encrypted under the same key. The different hashes to be signed under this by the same algorithm. Okay. And then for each one of them we have timing. So we have this data of M's and the corresponding T's. Whole bunch of data. And you have 10,000 of them. The more the better, because then separation becomes clear. Yeah? We measure this, and then we get out, and now we are off the processor, and we're working offline based on the data. Okay. So what is it that we're trying to do? Here's essentially how we're doing this. Suppose that you know the first 16-bit of the key. It's an RSA key, and you know the first 16-bit. How would you know the first 16-bit? You don't know the first 16-bit. What would you do? Well, you create, in a way, 2 to the 16 different prediction path. I don't want to say prediction because that's branch prediction. 2 to the 16 different sort of cryptanalysis paths. That in one of them, the first 16-bit is, let's say, 10, 1010. Another one is 00101, etc. So each one of them. You have this 2 to the 16 roads to go. And you're in one of them. And therefore, in one of the roads, you know what the first 16-bit is. Great. Now you're on that road, and you know the previous 16-bit, and now you are on the 17th bit that you're trying to guess correctly. And the 17th bit is either 0 or 1. Yeah? So based on this, and based on the Montgomery reduction and the final step, final subtraction, okay, you're going to make an assumption. Okay. Now, then what you do, you take your data, 10,000 measurements. You break into 2 sets. First set is the one under the assumption that the bit is 1. And the second set under the assumption the bit is 0. The key bit, RSA bit, is 1 or 0. Okay. Then let's take the first set. Also break this into 2 parts where this is this time about whether branch is taken or not taken. Yeah? And so we have these 4 cases. So I want to show you this picture. We have these 4 cases where the key bit is 1, branch is predicted, okay, to be taken, but it actually was not taken. So it's misprediction. Okay. So M, that particular M, just break it into 4 parts. Take your data, 10,000 measurements, break into 4 parts where one said that M causes misprediction and the bit is 1. And another said M does not cause a misprediction and the bit is also 1. So there's 4 sets. And then you say, you compute the average time for each one of the sets because you have the timings, for the encryption times for each one of them. And if you're just looking at garbage, random data, the timings will be all very similar and you have learned nothing. Yeah? But if you're looking at very valuable data, then the assumptions, the separations will be clear to you. Yeah? And this is the idea behind the attack. See, what happens is that, there is more to say. First of all, because of the 16 bits, you can go ahead and the input M. You know the first 16 bits of the RSA keys. You can go ahead and simulate the computation the way the actual cipher process is doing, because you have all the data you need based on your assumption. You go ahead and compute, the RSA. During the RSA computation, you go ahead and compute it for every bit. So therefore, up to the 16th bit, not only you have M to the E or M to the D of that first 16 bits, okay? And therefore you know what to compute next when you compute for the next bit. But what you don't know is what the next bit is. And therefore you have these 2 roads to compute. And then once you compute it, then you know whether that is going to cause, the first one is going to cause final subtraction or not, because you have the actual data, because you have come there by simulating with the actual data based on the assumptions. You come there and then you know that the Montgomery reduction will have a final subtraction here. And then, or you know that Montgomery reduction will not have a final subtraction there. And not only that, you know something else. You know the branch prediction algorithm. And you know how branch prediction algorithms are supposed to behave. Let's say that they behave based on the last 5 branches. Then you know the last 5 branches because you know the full history of the algorithm. And therefore, having known the full history, you know what branch prediction algorithm will predict. It will, based on that 5 bits, it will predict not taken. And you know it will be not taken, or you know it will be taken also. And so you have full knowledge of it, but accept that your data is in 2 sets. One set is where the key bit is 1, one set is where key bit is 0, which you have no information about. But when you separate your data into 2 sets, if the separation is very clear, then you know if it's 1 or 0. And that's the idea behind it. And this is this attack is still one-dimensional, because what you got there is the plain text and the corresponding timings. And then you have, based on the assumptions that you know the first 16 bits, and then you separate into it, you know the prediction algorithm, and you know its history. You separate into 2 sets, and you compute the average times, and you compute the average times, and you compare them. If those average times are too close, okay, or too separate, and that gives you the full information. So, for example, I want to show you this picture, okay? Whether the separation is correct, you know, when you broke into 2 parts, whether separation is correct or whether it is random, it becomes very clear, you know? And then the more data you use, the more clear it becomes, you know? I don't have exactly the same picture, but this is for the other attack. But what happens is that the separation between becomes more and more. Let's say with 10,000 or 20,000 measurements or 40,000 becomes more and more. And therefore, if it falls here, then you know it's 1. If it falls here, then you know it's 0. So you have this 100,000 of data. It's all analysis, all done offline. The only thing you got is just the timing. And that's it. This is the kind of attack it is. Yeah, go ahead.
If you're doing it bit by bit, you need a big gap. If you do a Viterbi style decoder, you would get a much better.
No, I didn't think about that. I didn't think about that at all. But I will tell you this. If I could get a closer look, then things would be different. Yeah. What is closer look? Is that if I could get as close as knowing squaring and multiplication times, then I know the bits, and then 1 measurement suffices. And this is what's called the simple attack. In the simple attack, not only you have total encryption time, you have encryption time for each bit. Addition, subtraction, and multiplication times for each bit. And you have that much information, not just the total, the sum of all them, but each one of them. And that's the question. How do you measure each one of them? In a simple attack, how do you measure each one of them? In this simple attack, you know, as you remember from the cache attack, this is all access driven. In the simple attack, it's time driven. There you're measuring your exact time. How much it takes you to read it or not, you know, the spy process, how much it takes it to read the data from the branch target or not. I mean, I should explain that to you. What do you mean reading branch target? Well, you create a code that has a lot of loops in it. Just too many loops is going to fill up the branch target buffer. And therefore, when it's filled up, then you know, let's say you make it busy, you fill it up. When the RSA code comes, okay, RSA code is forced to mispredict. It has no choice, and therefore, again, having known the history of the last 16 bits and whether there will be final subtraction or not, and you know that it will be forced to mispredict, and therefore, if it mispredicts and pays the penalty, then the bit must be 1, or 0. You know, depending on which one it is, and you have a complete certainty over it now, because you know the timing between the steps of the RSA algorithm, not just the final timing. Do you understand that? I think the rest of the talk is just trying to explain this with more words, but essentially there's two attacks different in that following way. And one of them you only have the final total time, the other one you have the in-between time, or every step of the way as you follow through the RSA algorithm, I mean to the binary exponentiation, then you have the timing in between. And then you are forcing the other guy to mispredict all the time by filling it up, filling the branch target buffer. Yeah.
What unit is the vertical axis here? Minus 300 to 150. I don't know whether nanoseconds or years.
This one?
Yes.
Cycles.
Oh, cycles.
Yes. Cycles. This one is the simple attack where the squarings and multiplications separate, and therefore you know for sure what the RSA key bits are, and you need only one measurement for that. Okay. So I think after having explained these attacks, I want to tell you some of my ideas, and you can shoot each one of them as you know more about it than I do. First of all, I believe that this works despite this partitioning protection mechanisms. Because you know, I'm not trying to read your data. I know I can't. You know, I'm just trying to fill the branch predictor buffer, you know, the branch target buffer, so that you would be forced to mispredict and pay penalty, or not pay penalty. If you are forced to mispredict and not pay penalty, you must be 1. If you're forced to mispredict and pay penalty, you must be 0. I know that. So that's it. So there are impacts on multi-user systems, of course, VPNs, virtual machines, trusted computing, sandboxes, remote attacks. It's a pure software attack. Measure and then analyze. And it's hard to detect this attack because the code is code has a lot of loops and then measurements. Those are all the yellow areas are the ones that current attacks have been done, you know, microarchitecture attacks have been done on Pentium, right? So what are the other areas where we can actually, you know, launch a microarchitectural attack? Which other parts of Pentium can we do? So far, as I said, there is instruction cache, data cache, and branch target buffer, and functional unit attack. And what about countermeasures? Well, hardware countermeasures for microprocessor architects and software countermeasures for software developers. Already, after this attack was published last June, OpenSSL had gone into several revisions, at least 1 or 2 revisions, and then some of these branch prediction problems have been eliminated. But you will probably discover more, and people are discovering more. Are software countermeasures sufficient? Solving it in software, to me, means solving it one by one. And their software solutions are algorithm and attack specific. And they also incur high performance overhead, software solutions. But hardware countermeasures are maybe solving it for all, maybe. Yeah? They may not be algorithm specific. You don't know what algorithm is, you just protect it in the hardware. And how you protect it, I will tell you. And they may have also much less overhead. And we've gone through trying to analyze this and trying to find hardware countermeasures against branch prediction attacks. Well, for example, one thing you can do, you can randomize the branch prediction. Is that a bad idea? Yes, it is, in terms of performance. Instead of taking, say not taking, you know, today I don't feel like taking it, you know. So therefore you will be paying a large penalty each time. You can partition branch target buffers, maybe protected areas or free areas, you know. You can create lucky mechanisms, flushing mechanisms. Before you give it away, you flush it, but that means next time he comes, he will be not taken. So, yes, sir.
Why wouldn't you just give up on prediction?
Yeah, give up branch prediction. Yeah. Yeah, because I think this, if you go into really, that kind of approach, that probably is going to avoid this completely. I just showed the pictures of two hardware countermeasures. The randomizable prediction and a protected buffer. And another idea is just to have separate branch target buffer for each process, because they are not big enough. Maybe they are. But there is another attack on the branch prediction algorithm. Because the algorithm, it's going to be taken or not taken. You can actually, based on the trace, you can actually create an attack. That has nothing to do with buffer. You don't try to fill the buffer. You just try to mimic and guess what the branch predictor will do, and therefore find the timing. And so these are, I believe, things that we should be doing, let's say. So I guess another question is, what is the impact on trusted computing of having branch prediction attacks as the Damocles' sword, on your head? And in the trusted computing group's approach, hardware is the trust anchor, right? Maybe TPM itself not vulnerable, but higher levels of the system may be vulnerable. And it may undermine, these attacks may undermine isolation principle. And what I want to know is next generation secure computing base, and how branch prediction type of attack, microarchitectural attacks are understood and fit into that framework. And so far we had focused on cryptosystem vulnerabilities. But what else can you do with these attacks? Can you have applications snoop into one another's data? Can you create scenarios like this? And what about virtual machines? One spy process can run in one virtual machine, look into others. And can we have high degree of isolation? And what about hypervisors and virtual machine monitors? Can you handle it there? For example, they can flush the data between virtual machines, switching between the virtual machines. And the rest of the ones are all these papers, past and present, written in this area for somebody who wants to do more on this. Any questions for me? Yeah.
Well, that is an instruction to do that. So in that sense, every CPU that comes out will have a different piece of code to do that. Right. So that's really problematic.
Yeah. Well, so far what's been done, the only thing that was done really is the OpenSSL was fixed up. Well, it's this, Peter is here, in the Montgomery algorithm, it's possible to avoid the final subtraction. You rewrite the code that way, and therefore you avoid that. So, yeah. Yes.
Maybe you can spy on the spy. So you may conclude that some cycles are wasted.
Yeah.
Without it.
Yeah.
Well, probably if you're going to be monitoring to see if another program's running, why not institute a software layer where you force something to run another processor core to prevent something else from running? In other words, if you're going to be monitoring to see if somebody's running something else and you care about that, then you do it yourself. But that's going to have its own performance hit as well, because
Well, I want to ask you the following questions. Just tell me if you have heard this branch prediction attack before. And, okay, if you haven't heard, do you think it's real? Do you think it's convincingly important? And I think that's really what really matters right now, because and the solutions are to be studied. Nobody really knows the best solution. And one solution could be just get rid of that piece of junk from the processor. No more branch target buffer, no more branch prediction. But they put a lot of effort into that. I mean, there's 15, 20 years of research. There's a French guy who has devoted his entire career in creating branch target buffers and branch predictor algorithms.
In typical code, there's a branch every 10 to 15 instructions.
10 to 15, yeah.
Yeah.
Then this big threat. So.
150 cycles every gets expensive.
Maybe what we do is for these instructions in my code, I just write my blah. I say inject an instruction that will disable the BPD lookup or follow
Yeah.
instruction.
Having static prediction would be one of the ways to solve it.
Pragma begin cryptic or pragma end cryptic.
Yeah.
Often things are compiled to generate a non-branch form of the upcoming code at the maximum function.
Yeah. If the code is free of branches, no problem.
There's also the conceivable alternative, and this is a little naive perhaps, of being symmetric on your branch prediction. That
Yeah.
you fill out the entire prediction tree to a certain depth and
Yeah.
go no further. Don't try to be clever about it.
Yeah. Yeah.
From a hardware, I noticed that you mentioned the protected
Buffer.
buffer.
Yeah.
And do you know if that's like being implemented in any methods? I mean, I know we're kind of
Yeah. No,
getting
nothing.
trusted platform sections of the
Nothing.
processor now.
Everything here has been shared with Intel. And they just looked at it and come back 3 weeks later, a plan to update the OpenSSL. That was it. But I'm sure somebody there somewhere, are working on this. And we'll hear about it, but not right now.
Any proposal that would fix this and cost 3% of performance on General's CPU is a non-starter.
Non-starter, exactly. I agree with that.
Well, just interesting, because if you think about it, if we were to actually, like you said, 10 to 50% of cycles, every 10 to 15 cycles is a branch prediction. You eliminated that, and you gained the performance from branch prediction misses into the cycles. We could reduce probably our CPU speed by half. You're right, because you're costing so many cycles for a branch prediction miss.
Because the overwhelming majority of these branches are never taken. It's the do this.
Yes,
If there was an error,
true.
do this. If there was
True.
an error. And all these if error are never taken. So
Yes.
that predicted really, really well.
Really
Yeah,
well,
that's what we
exactly.
work extremely hard at.
Yeah.
So the misprediction rate is something.
90% of the time it correctly predicts. Yeah.
So getting rid of those branches would be good, but it doesn't really solve the underlying issue.
Okay. Yes, sir.
If you're talking to a different browser across a net,
Yeah.
every bureaucracy knows you don't send a reply when it's ready. You put it on the shelf for 3 days extra just so nobody knows when you've done the work.
True.
With a reasonably loud random delay, just put in for spy. It stops these attacks.
Yeah,
across the net.
solve the timing.
Just forces you to get more data.
Noise, exactly. Add lots of noise.
No, it's true. More noise added, you need 100 million data points. Then that's not going to be feasible, and it will force you out. There's no question about that. But everything we have done, by the way, is simulations. Yes, we know that if you could make 10,000, measurements, yeah, the separation looks obvious. 100,000 makes it too obvious, unnecessarily. Yeah, but it's on a simulated environment.
But for example, in Windows, you can call the DKPI functions and cause crypto to be happening on a key that you don't know, but you can trigger the operation on that key. So there's a number of places where you can just sit and trigger the operating system to go do crypto on your behalf with a key you don't know. Then, doing
Yes, sir.
where it's a symmetric.
I would expect that how susceptible a particular CPU architecture is to these effects would depend a lot on how many shared components there are between the CPUs. So like hyper-threading would be a lot worse than dual core,
True.
which in turn would be worse than two separate processors,
Yes.
depending on whether the caches were shared and that kind of stuff.
Exactly.
Have you got any quantitative sense?
No, I don't. This is the research that was done with a graduate student on a simulated environment of one processor, etc. Just that kind of resources. But clearly, all this hyper-threading, multiple processor, they all need to be looked at more carefully. But actually, what I'm much more interested is whether this is beyond crypto. Here we're talking about only security of cryptography. What I really want to know is, what about security of applications, the security of operating systems due to attacks like this? That's the question to ask. Yeah.
I will mention that one symmetric cipher that has interesting branch predictive property, that's idea cipher, which was used to in BGP for a while.
Yeah. Does it have any loops? I don't remember.
No, it has if an operand is 0, you do something special.
Oh, exactly. Of the 2 to 16, exactly. Yeah, it has that kind. Yeah, if it's 0, do this, and you're right. There is one like that. That's not good. That's why AES is better, with respect to this. No.
I don't know.
Yeah.
You can code around
You
those
remember-
things.
I don't think anybody uses Cas5, but I think BGP did use
Yeah,
it.
because of Entrust. Entrust uses Cas5. Yeah. Yeah, you remember Entrust profiles and whatnot? Yeah. I believe we still have that support in some bizarre tool to import Entrust ETSL files.
Yeah.
When you said you did this in simulation, did you actually measure? Did you actually count the cycles from the branch prediction things? Or
Yes,
you get
I did. I did a very faithful simulation. I had a random RSA key running on one processor and a SPI process, measuring it and then dumping the data and then analyzing and finding that key, and I did find it.
Okay.
So you
It's
actually
all actual simulation.
implemented the whole attack.
Precisely, on one processor, under my control, Yeah, and in fact, I make sure I just randomly selected keys being used so that, I'm not cheating, or my student is not cheating me. Yeah. Yeah, it does work, yes. Separations become really, really very obvious. Yeah.
It was 10,000 iterations.
10, anything over 10 start working. 100,000 makes it super duper, but 10, 20 makes it really well.
How long did it take?
Several days.
Several days.
Yeah.
Regular
Analysis.
CPU,
Yes,
regular
exactly.
Intel.
Yeah.
What was your hardware spending time? Paying for it?
Yes, been to
Hyperthread?
Yes, hyperthreading. Yes. I can check that. I believe that's true. Yeah.
Any other questions? Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much. Well, just one word. I'm really privileged to speak to an audience like this. I mean, I'll tell you, when I try to explain this, really, it's very difficult to explain it, and I get into trouble. But here, absolutely no trouble. Yeah, thank you very much.